After decades of French military presence on African soil, something historic has just happened. France's last military base in Senegal is no longer under its control. The French flag has been lowered and troops have been seen hurriedly leaving, some rushing through the airport with bags in hand, as if a major shift just took place. For many, it feels like a new chapter in history has begun. Senegal, once considered one of France's closest allies in West Africa, has taken a bold and unexpected step. President Bassar Daome Fay, known for his public alignment with Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has now matched words with action. He's followed through on a growing anti-colonial sentiment that's been building across the region. For years, critics believed France would always hold a military foothold in West Africa. A quiet but constant presence long after independence was claimed, but that belief has finally been broken. Camp Gil, the last French military base in Senegal, has officially been handed back to local control. Even the airfield at Dakar's international airport, once managed by French forces, has been returned. To many, this isn't just a matter of sovereignty. It's part of a bigger story unfolding across Africa, a movement rooted in dignity, pride, and the desire for true independence. This wave began with Burkina Faso under Traoré and has now reached Senegal. The message is clear: Africa is choosing its own path. To understand the weight of this moment, we need to look back. France first established its presence in what would become Senegal in 1659. By the 1800s, it had taken over most of West Africa, using African soldiers in its wars and setting up military bases. Across the region, in 1960, Senegal officially gained independence, but France never really left. Its troops, influence, and military agreements stayed, quietly but firmly. One of the most visible signs of that ongoing presence was Camp Gil, located in Dakar. For 65 years, it served as a hub for military training, joint operations, and strategic planning. Many saw it as a symbol of lingering colonial power. Then the dominoes started falling. In 2022, Mali told France to leave. Burkina Faso followed in 2023 under Traoré. Niger joined later that year. Chad handed back French facilities in early 2024. Ivory Coast followed in February 2025. And now, Senegal, long considered France's strongest ally in the region, has joined the wave. The two final French military outposts in Senegal have officially been returned. It marks the end of a 65-year deployment. These are real images from the handover ceremony in Dakar, small in size but massive in meaning. This chapter, which began with colonial expansion, continued through counterterrorism operations and military cooperation, is now closing. Not far from the ceremony site stands a statue of Demba and Dupont, two soldiers, one Senegalese and one French, arm in arm holding an olive branch. Together, they helped liberate France during World War II, but only one of them, the French soldier, was allowed to march into Paris. The Senegalese fighter was left behind. Now, it feels like history is coming full circle, as the French flag is lowered one last time and replaced by Senegal's. It's clear that Dupont is finally stepping away. Behind the barbed wire, the troops give one last salute, and just like that, the era ends. At one point, France had over 5,000 troops across Africa. Now, only about 1,500 remain, mostly in distant Djibouti. This is not by accident. It's part of a bigger shift happening across the continent. The power dynamics are changing. In November 2024, President Bassar Daome Fay made it clear: all French military bases in Senegal must close. He stated that a sovereign country should not host foreign military forces. His position was echoed by the Senegalese president as well, who, in a public interview, said he wanted all French troops gone before the end of the year. As Senegal approaches the 65th anniversary of its independence, leaders are pushing for a new kind of partnership with France, one based not on military power, but on equality, respect, and mutual benefit. They want the kind of relationship France has with other global partners, one that doesn't require soldiers or bases, but still values cooperation and growth. And so, with this final withdrawal, something larger is unfolding. This isn't just about one country or one base. It's a sign that Africa is rising, rewriting its own story, and reclaiming control of its future, wanting to remove foreign military bases, not just France's, but any, should not be misunderstood as a desire to cut ties with France altogether. That wasn't the message. What President Bassar Daome Fay expressed was part of a clear political promise to reclaim national sovereignty and move away from the lingering influence of the colonial era. This wasn't just talk. On January 1, 2025, he followed through by directing Senegal's defense minister to begin drafting a new national defense strategy. The plan, to end all foreign troop presence in the country by the end of the year. By February, Senegal and France had formed the Franco-Senegalese Commission, a formal body to handle the legal and logistical process of closing the bases. A full timeline was agreed upon, including the handover of Camp Gil and the airfield at Dakar's International Airport. The process moved steadily. On March 7th, France began returning key military facilities in the Maritel and Saint-Exupéry districts of Dakar. That was followed by the Control Pertet base on May 15th, and the Rufi Communications Station on July 1st. Finally, on July 17th and 18th, the biggest handovers took place, Camp Gil and the Dakar airfield. This wasn't chaos. It was an organized and legally agreed withdrawal. France didn't push back. It honored the timeline, formally handed over the bases, and publicly recognized that this was the beginning of a new type of relationship, one that ends permanent French military presence in West Africa and shifts toward sovereign partnerships. Instead, this wasn't just a symbolic win for Senegal. It was a diplomatic, legal, and strategic success, executed step by step, with France's cooperation. Much of this wave of change can be traced back to one unlikely figure, Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. When he rose to power in 2022, many outside Africa barely paid attention. He was 34 years old, a young artillery officer who seemed like a temporary figure. But within months, he became the face of something bigger. Traoré didn't just take control of a country. He sparked a continent-wide conversation. He stood on the legacy of leaders like Thomas Sankara and said aloud, what many African leaders avoided: Africa must free itself from foreign control, politically, economically, and militarily. In 2023, Traoré ordered all French troops out of Burkina Faso. He canceled long-standing military agreements, shut down French radio stations accused of spreading propaganda, and ended tax breaks for French companies operating in the country. It was bold, clear, and direct, and the rest of Africa noticed. Soon after, Mali and Niger followed a similar path. Between 2020 and 2023, all three nations experienced military-led transitions. But more importantly, they came together, forming the Alliance of Sahel States, cutting ties with France and looking inward for answers. This wasn't just about military cooperation. It marked the rise of a Pan-African movement, one rooted in self-determination, unity, and the rejection of outside control. The message was spreading fast. Africa can stand on its own, and it doesn't need foreign boots on the ground to move forward. This movement isn't built on hate. It's built on dignity. Captain Traoré's message was never anti-Europe. It was pro-Africa, and that distinction made all the difference. So when Senegal elected the reformist Bassar Daome Fay in 2024, it was clear the country was ready for a change. The region was already shifting, and Fay stepped into office with momentum behind him. Where Traoré wears a military uniform, Fay wears a suit. But their message, it's nearly identical. We will no longer be governed by the shadows of colonialism. The bond between President Fay and Captain Ibrahim Traoré hasn't gone unnoticed. The two have been seen together multiple times, in public events, regional meetings, and official state visits. Photos of them side by side have circulated widely, symbolizing a growing alliance, their shared vision for a stronger, sovereign Africa is clear and contagious. For months, political analysts predicted that Senegal would follow Burkina Faso's lead. And now, that prediction has come true. France is officially ending its military presence in Senegal after 65 years. This Thursday, the French military will hand over its last remaining bases to Senegalese authorities, concluding a 3-month withdrawal process all across the country. French troops have been spotted packing up, trucks loaded with equipment, soldiers hauling heavy bags, personal gear being moved out of bases. The exits are no longer symbolic, they're strategic. Senegal's military has fully taken control of its own installations, and with that, the country marks a turning point in reclaiming its sovereignty. The influence of Traoré has grown beyond just ideas. It's become a real, regional shift. So when President Faye demanded a full French military withdrawal by 2025, it didn't shock anyone. It felt inevitable. And now, with the final base returned, even civilian governments, not just military regimes, are standing up with the same Pan-African confidence that Traoré sparked. This is no longer just Burkina Faso's story, it's becoming Africa's story. In countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the movement was born through soldiers and uprisings. But in Senegal, the transformation came through a peaceful vote. In March 2024, the people of Senegal surprised the political world by electing Bassar Daome Fay, a former political prisoner and an outspoken reformist. He ran as an outsider, promising sovereignty, transparency, and national dignity, and he delivered. Almost immediately after taking office, Faye called for the complete withdrawal of all French troops by 2025. It was a bold move, especially in a country that had hosted French military forces since gaining independence. But Faye was firm. Senegal will continue diplomatic relations with France, but only on equal terms. His message was simple: we'll work with France, but not under France. And to be clear, he hasn't sought to cut ties completely. President Faye has repeatedly said this is not about severing friendships, it's about redefining them. This is about respect, balance, and ownership of African soil. Choosing to remove all foreign military presence, not just from France, but from any outside country, doesn't mean cutting ties with France altogether. That's not the point. President Faye made it clear. This is about sovereignty, not isolation. Unlike Mali or Burkina Faso, Senegal hasn't walked away from democratic institutions. Elections still happen. The press is still free. Civil rights are still protected. But that doesn't make Senegal's revolution any less powerful. In fact, some argue it might be even more impactful. President Faye is proving that pride, unity, and Pan-African strength don't have to come through force. They can come through the will of the people. To leaders, 2 styles, 1 message. If you've watched this far, or if you're still here, it means something. It means you care about this shift, about African voices, African dignity, and African control over African soil. So take a second to subscribe and follow our YouTube community. It tells us that you value content that actually matters, and it helps us keep telling these stories. Let's keep going. While Traoré moves with fire and intensity, Faye speaks with quiet authority. Both are rejecting colonial leftovers. Both are asking France to take responsibility. Both are helping ignite a continental awakening. And Faye hasn't stopped with the military withdrawal. He's also called for something even deeper, an apology, specifically, an apology for the 1944 Traoré massacre, where dozens of African soldiers, veterans of World War II, were executed by the very army they fought for. Faye asked the question many have avoided. How can there be true reconciliation if the past is never acknowledged? That question is now echoing across the continent. From Dakar to Bamako, from Ouagadougou to N'Djamena, France's once massive military presence is collapsing. What started as a few post-independence defense partnerships slowly turned into a widespread, deeply rooted military network. By the early 2000s, France had over 5,000 troops stationed across Africa. But today, they're gone. Gone from Mali, gone from Burkina Faso, gone from Niger, gone from Chad, gone from Ivory Coast, gone from Senegal. In just the past few years, France has pulled out base after base. In January 2025, it shut down the last one in Chad. In February, it left Ivory Coast. And in July, Senegal officially marked the final exit, the symbolic last chapter of France's West African military era. More than 4,300 French soldiers, withdrawn in under 3 years. But nature doesn't like a vacuum, and when one power leaves, others often step in. Russia has moved fast. The Wagner Group, a Russian private military company, has sent fighters to Mali, Burkina Faso, and the Central African Republic. In places where France was pushed out, Wagner stepped in, offering weapons and security services in exchange for access to local resources. The Central African Republic was one of the first to push France out, and Wagner quickly filled the gap. But it's not just Russia. Turkey, China, and even Iran have all deepened their relationships in West Africa, not just militarily, but economically. Trade deals, drone shipments, road construction, increasingly. These partnerships are coming from Ankara, Beijing, and Moscow, not Paris. And then there's Africa itself. In the Sahel region, something unprecedented is forming. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have come together to build the Alliance of Sahel States, a joint military and political bloc aimed at replacing dependency on foreign nations. With regional self-reliance, they're creating a unified defense force. Niger's defense minister Salifou Modi confirmed this week that the plan is already underway. These 3 nations, all former French colonies, experienced military coups between 2020 and 2023, and while their paths to power differed, the threat they've all faced has been the same: years of attacks by violent extremists, aligned with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Despite years of French military support, the violence only grew. So now, they've taken matters into their own hands. After breaking away from France, these nations formed a confederation. Their goal, regional strength through African-led security. No more relying on outsiders. No more promises from Paris. And now a new question is spreading, not just in the Sahel, but across the entire continent. What if Africa could protect itself on its own terms? Can Africa truly protect itself by itself? And if it can, will it finally take full control of its own destiny across West Africa? Many are celebrating France's departure, but not everyone is celebrating blindly. A harder question is now being asked. What happens next? Yes, the foreign troops are leaving, but the threats remain. Groups like ISIS in the Greater Sahara and Al-Qaeda in the Sahel are still active, and in many places, they're growing stronger. These groups feed off poverty, weak borders, and fragile governments. In Burkina Faso alone, over 2 million people have been displaced by violence. In Mali, some major cities are surrounded. In Niger, attacks continue to destabilize rural areas. Now that France is gone, will the new African coalitions be strong enough to fill the gap? Or has the region simply traded one crisis for another? Captain Traoré believes African problems need African solutions, and that the West has already proven it cannot deliver them. President Faye agrees on the importance of sovereignty, but he also highlights the need for smart diplomacy, regional coordination, and long-term development, because the real battle ahead isn't just military. It's about building stronger governments. It's about education, economic opportunity, healthcare, and infrastructure. Real independence doesn't come from lowering a flag or holding a press conference. It comes from actual change that people can feel, and that's where you come in. This revolution can't be won by presidents or soldiers alone. It needs people, teachers, engineers, writers, farmers, coders, thinkers, organizers, protectors of truth and culture. If the French are gone but corruption stays, if poverty and inequality still rule, then the revolution is not finished. But if Africa can rise, truly rise, by creating its own alliances, defending its borders, educating its youth, and building from the inside out, then this moment will be remembered as the beginning of something far bigger. From Ouagadougou to Dakar, from Bamako to Niamey, the winds of change are blowing. What began with soldiers in fatigues is now carried on by presidents in suits, students in classrooms, and everyday people in homes, villages, and cities across the continent. Ibrahim Traoré lit the match. Bassar Daome Fay carried the flame forward, and in doing so, they proved something powerful. The revolution doesn't need to wear a uniform Whether it starts with a coup or an election, what matters is the mindset, and that mindset is changing fast. The age of blind obedience to former colonial powers is ending. France has left Senegal, and soon it may leave the entire continent. But this story isn't just about foreign troops. It's about Africans reclaiming their voice, their choices, their future. This is not just Traoré's revolution, not just Fay's mission. It's our revolution. Your revolution. A movement of people who believe in a sovereign, united, and thriving Africa. One continent, many voices, one rising flame, because behind every headline, every speech, every troop withdrawal, there's something bigger happening. A generation is rising, and this new revolution, it's not wearing suits or uniforms. It's wearing hoodies, holding smartphones, coding apps, organizing protests, reshaping the narrative from the ground up. Africa is the youngest continent on Earth, with over 70% of its population under the age of 30. For too long, this youth was treated like a problem, overlooked, unemployed, silenced, or simply ignored. But not anymore. Africa's youth are no longer waiting for permission. They're becoming the continent's greatest strength, not in war, but in the fight for identity, dignity, and direction. It was young people who shared the words of Traoré and Fay across social media, making their messages impossible to ignore. It was youth organizers who mobilized, marched, and voted for change in Senegal. It's young Africans who are building digital businesses, exposing corruption, demanding answers from those in power, and refusing to be bound by the same colonial playbooks of the past. They're not just asking for independence, they're demanding transformation, not just freedom from Europe, but ownership over their future. Full stop. And they're not naive. They know removing French troops doesn't erase inequality, corruption, or poverty overnight. But they also know this: you can't build a new Africa with borrowed blueprints. This is a generation that wants to build, not beg. They don't want more charity. They want fair opportunities. They're done with empty speeches about potential. They want real platforms to unlock it. This revolution isn't just about reclaiming land or military bases anymore. It's about reclaiming possibility, and Africa's youth are the ones writing that future. For decades, the presence of foreign military bases wasn't just about defense. It was a symbol, a quiet reminder that even after independence, Africa's freedom was never fully complete. Bases like Camp Gil weren't just strategic outposts. They were monuments to a global imbalance, one that the world got used to pretending didn't exist. Every time a French plane took off from African soil, it wasn't just carrying troops. It carried the weight of unfinished liberation. So when Senegal reclaimed its airfield, when the French flag came down for the last time in Dakar, it wasn't just a routine military withdrawal. It was something deeper, something emotional, something historical. It was a signal that things have changed, that Africa will no longer rent its dignity, that it will no longer trade its sovereignty for a false sense of security, that it's no longer afraid to stand on its own. In a world that still measures power by how many bombs you hold or how many borders you control, Africa is starting to redefine what power really means. Not power over others, but power within. This is just the beginning. If you're still with us, if you're reading or watching, then know this: you're not just witnessing history, you're part of it. Like, share, subscribe, because the story of Africa is being written right now, and your voice matters.